begin by thanking all my friends here, and by friends I mean everybody who's here. And it's only because of your friendship, your love, your warmth that enables me to feel comfortable giving this talk today. I want to give a special shout out to my wonderful Machteinista sitting in the back, Dasi Baxt, who just called me up and said, I want to come. It's my wonderful daughter-in-law, Abigail's mother, and we also have Mrs. Berman, who's our wonderful grandmother, Dasi's mother. So it's really special that they came, and I consider Dasi and her mother not just Machteinista and grandmother-in-law, but also family. So that's why we let them come today. So today's talk is Growing Through Our Challenges, a Personal Perspective. And I finished typing up my speech, and then Hashem put a thought in my mind. Being that the title is Growing Through Our Challenges, a Personal Perspective, I said, Murray Wielgus gave a great speech yesterday on Jewish history, and she asked the question, is history a science or an art? And we concluded that it's both, because you can't have history without the scientific facts and events, but you need to have art to be able to give your perspective on history. So I thought that this is a great segue to the talk today, because the title, Growing Through Our Challenges, if all the events in our life, which is our history, if we don't learn from it and we don't grow from it, then it's just the cold science, it's just history. But if we use the lens and our perspective to grow from it, then that's our challenge, to grow from it, and we can grow. So, as many of you know, I'm generally more reserved and private person, and I don't do public speaking. So this is really out of my comfort zone. So I'd like to share why I decided to have this gathering today, even though it's really very emotionally difficult and draining. So this past year, as many of you know, we suffered the tremendous loss of our son Yisrael, Zechrono Livracha, who would have turned 34 today. 7 Zayin Av is his Hebrew birthday. And he was born with a neshama tahora, as we all are, but with many disabilities. And he left the world 33 years later as a neshama tahora, a pure soul without fate. And our Rav told us that his pure neshama does not need an aliyah. You know, everyone always says a neshama should have an aliyah. In this case, a neshama does not need an aliyah. So therefore, everything we do, we're really doing for ourselves. So during the Shiva, I had to do all the talking since no one could share any stories with me. And during the Shiva and afterwards, I received so many messages and texts and letters and phone calls from people telling me that they were so inspired by the stories that my husband and I shared, that they had made significant changes in their outlook and in their actions. And many suggested that I share it in a more public forum. And at that time, I wasn't up to it. However, as time went by, I realized that I could offer a personal perspective on growth through challenging times that could provide chizuk and inspiration to others. Everyone has challenges on different levels and different areas of our life. And our goal when dealing with these challenges is to stretch and grow, and not stress and shrink, and turn to Hashem and not away from Him, and to ask ourselves, lima, not lama. Lima, for what? What am I supposed to do with this challenge? Rather than asking why or why me. I've been there, done that. But this is a lot easier to say or write than to actually implement it into real life. So for those of you that don't know, or just to give you some background, we were a young couple, all of 23 years old, with a 10-month-old baby, Dini, that we had waited for almost 3 years, so we were on top of the world. And when I was 5 months pregnant, I was told that the baby wasn't growing as it should. And this continued throughout the pregnancy, and the doctors were clueless what was causing it and what I could expect. And most assured me that the baby would never make it to delivery or live. So after 9 months, he was born weighing only about 2 pounds, and he remained in the NICU for 5 months. Unfortunately, his severe disabilities affected his brain and his ability to hear or speak, his growth, and he was able to walk on his own. And for 3 years, he was at home, and then when we could no longer provide for his needs, he was in a group home. So, four tissues. Okay, so what do you do when you're 23 and your whole world comes crashing down? You do as our Bubbies and Zadies have done throughout the generation, and we turn to Tehillim, which is a source of comfort to us all in our most difficult times. And I want to base the talk on Kapitel Tzadi Beis 92. Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, Tov Lahodas L'Hashem L'Zamer L'Shimcha Elyon, but I'd like to talk about this part, Lahagid Baboker Chazdecha Ve'munascha Ba'leilos. Rashi explains that this is not referring to the weekly Shabbos, Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos, but to the world to come, where the man will achieve the spiritual perfection that we can only glimpse on Shabbos. And that's why we say, May Ein Olam Haba, Yom Shabbos Menucha. Shabbos is a glimpse of the Olam Haba. And the literal translation is that we'll relate about your kindness in the dawn and your faithfulness, the Emunah, in the nights. Dawn symbolizes the Geula, and the night, obviously, is Galus. We can also understand that we will speak about your Chesed in the dawn when things are going well, and we'll use our faith in the dark times. So I'd like to focus on the concepts of Emunah and gratitude when going through challenging times. How do we define Emunah? Sorry that I'm looking at the computer, but this is so difficult that if I was to say this without notes, I'd probably forget half the things that I want to say. How do we define Emunah? Emunah is the belief that no circumstances are random and that everything is directed by Hashem, who loves us. Bitachon is when that belief is filtered and inculcated into our behaviors. In this situation, the doctors had no idea what caused this. And they told us it was a fluke. It wasn't genetic, it was a fluke. We sent his records all over the world in the following years, and we never got any answers. I didn't go to medical school, and I'm not a doctor. But because of my Emunah, I know for sure this was no fluke. This was no accident. See, when human beings make plans, we have a plan A and a plan B. If you want to go somewhere, we say we'll go here, but if it rains, that's plan A. But if it rains, we have plan B and we'll go somewhere indoors. If we apply to a seminary of our choice, that's plan A. And then if we don't get accepted, then there's plan B, we'll go to a different seminary. We don't really understand that if we didn't get accepted and we are going to plan B, then that's really plan A. But by Hashem, there's no plan B. And we understood that it's not that this was a healthy pregnancy and something went wrong, and therefore the baby wasn't healthy. No, by Hashem, it's plan A, and this is as difficult as it was to accept. This was the plan and is the plan. And so only humans have plan A and plan B, but by Hashem, there's only plan A. And in fact, when he was nifter, I thought about it, that, you know, in 7th grade, I don't know about all the schools that everybody went to, but we had to memorize Parshas Hazinu. I always wondered, like, what do I have to do that for? Like, if I really want to know Parshas Hazinu, I can always open up the Chumash. but it was actually my grandson's bar mitzvah parsha. And one pasuk which I memorized, which came in very handy, is Hatzor Pamim Palo. He called Drachav Mishpat. Hashem's ways are perfect. And we say in Ashrei that Tzadik Hashem B'chol Drachav, but it's our lifetime's work to use our emunah muscles and keep them in top form so that we can access them as needed. So I'm fortunate to have very strong emunah genes in my DNA. My parents are Holocaust survivors who retained their emunah despite the horrors that they endured. And I think that we always have to remember that we cannot control our circumstances, but we can control our reaction to it. So how do we maintain and strengthen our emunah? We can compare it to running, as a lot of you can relate to, the runners. If you want to run, you can't decide one day, okay, I'm going to run down, Rod and Gun Hill Road. You really, although some people here make it look very simple, but you have to first walk, and then you have to keep on walking, and then maybe walk and run a little bit and build it up. And you have to practice and keep at it, because otherwise your muscles are not going to remain strong. We all learned in school all these psukim and the midrashim, and we heard all the stories, and we can easily quote them. But sometimes, not sometimes, but in life we have to put this into practice. We can teach someone how to swim by standing at the edge of the pool and showing them the proper strokes, and probably they can all execute it perfectly. But then you have to get into the water and swim. While my son was in the hospital for 5 months, I found out that I was pregnant with my son, Mendy. And here, I had a baby who was hanging between life and death, and we didn't know what the cause of all of it was. And now I had the additional worries of this upcoming baby. Would it be a healthy baby? So you can imagine the emotional turmoil that I was in. And I remember going to my parents' house at night, and I was crying to my father, Olaf Shalom. And I said to him, Tati, how much does a person have to take? And without a moment's hesitation, he answered, as much as the Eibishter gives, as much as Hashem gives. Now I'm sure that if we went around the table and the room, you could probably give the same exact answer. But let's understand who was giving this answer. My father, who survived Auschwitz at age 16 and lost his parents and his brother. And this was his daughter crying to him about his grandson. But this was his firm belief and emunah speaking. And this is my mantra and the words that I try to live by. I once confided in someone who had a son with some special needs that I was worried about what's going to be with shidduchim for my kids. We all know how crazy shidduchim are. So even though I knew it wasn't genetic, and she told me a very simple sentence. And she said, Shandy, the same Hashem that gave you Yisrael also prepared shidduchim for your children. Very simple but profound statement. But sometimes we forget that everything comes from the same source, Hashem, the good and what we can't see the good in. The same Hashem who sends us what we see as good and what we perceive as not so good. And so it was. Baruch Hashem, each of my children found wonderful spouses. We even have mother of one and grandmother of one of the spouses. And they were among the first in their class to get engaged, and the shidduch process went very easily. I didn't get any no responses because of this situation. In fact, my son-in-law, when he was told about Deanie's special brother, said, I'm sure that makes her an even more caring and sensitive person. So you have to believe it's all coming from Hashem. And now, I'd like to pause for a moment for a reality check. And I did this with the people that came, for the Shiva, where I got to do all the talking. This sounds all idealistic. And it sounds like I just sailed right through it. I got everything. I had the right thoughts and beliefs and all, and it just worked. And I'm a regular person, not a Rebbitzin. Just, you see me, you know me, or at least you thought you know me. I don't want to create an illusion of toxic positivity, which means I want to be very real. And never tell anyone with something difficult, that's going through something difficult, oh, you must be so special that Hashem chose you. That's the worst thing to tell someone. Sounds good, sounds frum, not the thing to say. Reality check. We were and are a regular couple. Parents who had the dreams, the hopes, and the aspiration for a child like everyone else, and this was not to be. And in the words of Eicha, Al Eila Ani Bachia, and Al Eila Ani Yardadima. So I want to be real about it. I shed rivers of tears throughout the 33 years, and I share my pain, not for you to feel sorry for me, but to be real. Every time I went to visit him, I recalled the past, and of course I would cry, and it never got easier, to be honest. I would recall a special pasuk that we say, and I would tell Hashem, remember all the tears that I'm crying. There's a beautiful pasuk that they made into a song, and it's actually in the Eilah. So the Eilah is the time on Yom Kippur when we start getting really nervous. It's getting dark, we're feeling weak, but as you get older, you're not so worried about when you're gonna eat. We're getting older and we're getting more real and mature, and we realize we should be nervous that the Yom Hadin is closing, and the book of life is also being shut, and the Zardin is happening, and we get nervous by Ne'ilah. And as it gets darker, and soon we're going to, be Mekabel Olmach Shemayim, we're going to walk the Shekhinah through the different levels to Shemayim, it says the gates start closing. And there's one gate that doesn't close, and that's the Shari Dima, the gate of tears. So when I would go visit him, I would always say, Hashem, I'm going to remind you about all the tears that I shed throughout the year. And there were very many. And what we say is, and it's a beautiful part of the tefillah in the Eilah, and it says, Yehi ratzon l'fanecha, shomea kol b'chiyos. May it be your will, the one who hears all the weeping, shetasim demosenu b'notcha, that you should put all the tears in a flask, lios, and to stay, and I would remind Hashem about all the tears that I shed throughout the year. And then I would say to myself, Shady, you gotta be kidding. You just finished saying, Ata Zocher Masei Olam, that Hashem remembers everything. Ata Bochein Kloyos Vulev, Hashem knows our insides, and I'm reminding Hashem about my tears, but it felt good anyway. And my machzor, me being me, of course I show up wearing mascara, I don't know why, but all my pages are basically black from my tears. And my husband always tried to buy Psicho and Ne'ilah. Most people knew of the situation, and they tried not to outbid him so he could stand by the Aron Kodesh, Matzah Yom Kippur. And I would literally be able to take his towels and just wring it out because it was wet and drenched. And for my children, having this most special sibling, they're really amazing. I should, and I do tell my children, Zacharti la chesed nurayach. I remember the chesed, your chesed that you did when you were young and continue to do as you were growing up. every third or fourth Sunday, we would travel upstate to visit him. So we tried to make it pleasant for them, and my husband would go beforehand and buy the latest CD. And at that time, there were no, vans with CD players, so he made some kind of contraption. So I was zocha to listen to Uncle Maishi for 3 hours going and 3 hours coming. But you know what? Today, if you want your kids to come with you just to the grocery store, you have to bribe them. And if it's going to be longer than 5 minutes, they also want to watch a video when they go. And these kids, they were willing, not only willing, they never said they didn't want to go. And if they said they didn't want to go, if they would have said, which they never did, we wouldn't have forced them to go. But they loved him unconditionally. And when I say unconditionally, it really is an unconditional love because he couldn't reciprocate. And we'd come and we'd go to Apollo Mall. For those of you who remember Apollo Mall, they knew us there. We took him bowling, and he loved cars, so we bought him every car magazine. He had a subscription. And he has such a gentle nature that even though he couldn't hear or speak or understand, he never hurt anyone, never hit the kids. And I always wore sunglasses in the car. Whether it was sunny or dark and raining, it could be like 7 o'clock at night. So the kids wouldn't see me cry, or my husband would tell me he has to make a phone call, disappear, and then come back. And start the drive home. And we'd come home, and when they speak about Vemunas Chabaleilos, my days were nights also. And it took the most tremendous emunah to be able to get up in the morning, the next morning, or any morning actually, but particularly after visiting, and be able to be able to focus on the positive and still be able to thank Hashem. And interestingly enough, when I told my son Mendy that I would be speaking and basing it on this pasuk, he reminded me that this is the quote he said by Levaya, which obviously I have no recollection of who said what. And he said, my parents told us in reference to Yisrael that it's okay to be sad and maybe not understand, but to always remember it's Hashem's plan, and that when Mashiach will come, he'll be healthy, and we will understand. The basis of our emunah is that all of it comes from Hashem, and we are not in control. I always say we're not in control of the big things and not even the smallest thing. Everyone knows that I am the container queen. I like everything in containers. To me, the container store, I have to lighten up the thing a little bit. To me, the container store is the equivalent of Toys R Us for kids. So, being that I'm a therapist, after some analysis, I concluded that this is one thing I can control in my life. Where the pasta goes, where the cookies, where the flour goes. So now I can say that my containers, and there are many of them, are a symbol of my emunah. A reminder to me that these are the only things that I can control in my life. But truthfully, one of the greatest stress-reducing techniques is to remember that you're not in control. You can do your shtadlus, but you can't control the outcome. We can't control our circumstances, but we can control our reaction to it. On a simplistic level, in my work as a child psychotherapist, I work in a school, and the children often come to me saying, I hate my teacher, I'm not coming to school anymore, I want to go to a different school, I hate everything. And I'll ask them why they feel that way, they tell me, and I'll validate their emotions, because that's what you're supposed to do. And then, let's say it's January, I'll tell them, okay, it's January now, do you think your teacher is getting fired or she's quitting? And they'll tell me no. I'll say, and do you think you're really going to be coming to school every day, from now till June? And they say, yeah, I guess so. And then I ask them, so we have a choice. You can be miserable, and you can make your teacher miserable, and then the school in turn will probably make you miserable. Or we can think of some things to do to make things more pleasant. Maybe we could find something about your teacher that you actually like. What can we do? And I have on my desk sunglasses, different colors, those big clown sunglasses, because I speak about feelings, and the best way to show about feelings, I let them put on the red when they're angry and the green if they're feeling jealous. And I asked them which sunglasses would they choose, and they put on the black sunglasses. And I asked them, how does everything look to you? And they tell me black. I said, well, that's because you're not letting any of the sun in, and until you take off those sunglasses. So we adults, we sometimes feel the same exact way. I don't like this, I don't like what's happening to me, I don't like my circumstances. And my famous line is, if you can't change your circumstances, change the way you think about it. So how do you balance and lead a normal life with such challenging circumstances? So we have to find that balance to provide a happy life for ourselves and our kids. So you can, one choice is withdraw and have a pity party. But although your friends may show up, nobody wants to stay there. So it's not easy. And sometimes you have to fake it until you make it. So on my list of people I thank for helping me fake it, it's MAC, Maybelline, Revlon, Lancome, and all those companies. Getting back to our gratitude and our chesed. There are many psukim focusing on Hashem's chesed. Remember, the pasuk is Lahagid Baboker Chesdecha V'Nascha B'Leilos. We spoke about the Emunah and the Leilos. Let's talk about the chesed. We have Ashrei and Hallel. Why do we have to keep talking about the chesed? Why don't we just recognize it? Why do we have to keep talking about it? And it's because many times in our life we have those aha moments where we say, wow, Hashem's so good to me, Hashem loves me, I feel like Hashem just gave me a hug. You want to hear about my Hashgacha Pratis story. But then later, when things are not going as well as we'd like to, it's kind of like riding in wet sand, and it gets washed away, which is why we keep on having to talk about the chesed of Hashem constantly, so that it could bolster our emunah in difficult times. And why do we struggle with expressing our gratitude? Many people have a really hard time saying thank you, and children included, and that's because when we say thank you, we are acknowledging that someone did something for us. And we're living in the me generation. Es kommt mir, everything is coming to me, so why should I say thank you? So there's a fascinating story told about a convention of neurologists in 2018. One of the speakers, Professor Linda McMahon, spoke about a phenomenon that there are people who, when they get out of bed suddenly in the morning, they get dizzy. And she studied this condition, and she came to the conclusion that it's a result of the quick transition from the prone position to standing, and the body requires 12 seconds for the blood to flow from the feet to the brain. She recommended that everyone should sit on their bed, regardless if it happens to you or not, if you have the condition, to prevent any dizziness for 12 seconds. And her lecture was greeted by enthusiastic applause. Then another professor, a religious Jew, asked to speak, and he said, we have an old tradition, and we recite a prayer, giving thanks to the Creator immediately upon waking. It's 12 words, and if you say it slowly, it's 12 seconds. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayim shechazarta bi b'shrasi v'chemla rabba v'musacha. And then they all stood up and applauded for the Creator of the world. And I will now share a personal story about gratitude, and I think this left the greatest impression on all who heard, and for those who came to the Shiva, and to Menachem Avil, sorry, but I think you'll enjoy hearing it anyway. When I was, like I said, I was in the hospital still visiting my son, and we didn't know what was going to be, and I found out I was pregnant. Obviously, I was in great emotional turmoil, and we consulted with many different rabbanim, and our Rav at the time was Rav Leibel Katz, Zecher Tzadik Bracha, and he said, you know what, I'm going to get you a bracha from the Steipler son. And believe it or not, at that time, very few people had heard about the Steipler son. Everybody knew about the Steipler Rav, but he had already been nifter. So he said, I'll get you a bracha from the Steipler son. And he called him, he told us that this is obviously Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Zecher Tzadik Bracha. He gave a bracha, and I'm so happy that I am here today to relate the story about my son Mendy, and his mother-in-law and grandmother-in-law are here today to hear the story for about the 100th time and share in the nachas. So we got a bracha, and Reb Chaim had said that not only will he be healthy, but he will be a great Talmid Chacham. And at the time, because of my situation and because I didn't have the emotional energy to put much thought into it, I filed it away somewhere in my brain, but I'm like, okay, great, thank you, and went on to all my worries. And as Mendy grew up, and please don't tell him anything when you see him in Birchwood, as he grew up, we saw that this was like a little out of the norm. This was a child who would get up in 5th grade early, say Tehillim, and he was really in his, in his study, in his learning, Gemara and all. Mamish has a photographic memory, and he really is beyond the average, really above average. And us being average parents were like, where did he come from? What is this? And after a while, we did remember this bracha that we had gotten, and we started connecting the dots where it came from. So fast forward, Mendy was in yeshiva in the Mir, and my husband had a wedding in London, and he said, you know what, I'm going to surprise Mendy. I'm going to hop over. I wasn't with him at the time, and I'm going to visit Mendy in the Mir. And he did, and then he told him, you know what, Mendy, I think it's time. We're going to go back to Reb Chaim, and I want to go say thank you. And so he got someone to get a private audience, which is not so easy. Got a private audience, and he hired this driver who would also be a translator, because my husband doesn't speak Yiddish or Hebrew that well. So he went to Reb Chaim, and it was a private audience, and he said to him, this man came from America, he wants to say thank you, and he told him the whole story. And Reb Chaim said, Nachamo. So the translator repeated the story, Nachamo, again. And Reb Chaim said, Nachamo. He said it for the 3rd time. At that point, the translators looked at my husband like, what's going on? Reb Chaim didn't have any comprehension issues or hearing issues, so he understood that he is going to give an explanation. He said, based on the amount of people that come to me, there should be hundreds and thousands of people in the hospital. He said, because nobody ever comes back to me to tell me what happened. And he was so happy to hear and to have someone come back and say, thank you for your bracha. It was really Mekayim. Here he is. This is my Mendy, my Talmid Chacham. And I have over here a picture, a beautiful picture. It's really priceless. At the time of the Shiva, Reb Chaim was still alive. So now, this is, worth, it's really priceless. And gratitude for what we have and focusing on the positive is the key to getting through and growing through our challenges. We can create a paradigm shift in the way we view things. I'm going to tell you something magical. It's 2 words, and it really works. Instead of saying, I have to, try swapping it for 2 words. I get to. It's not I have to go to my child's graduation. I get to go. And I tried this on my 50th trip for food shopping for Pesach. And I got into my car and I said, I have to go, food shopping again for Pesach. I'm going to the grocery again. And then I said, no, I get to go to the grocery to shop for Pesach because Baruch Hashem, I have who to cook for, and because Baruch Hashem, I have the money to buy it with, and most of all, I have the health that I'm able to go. Little thing, 2 words that makes a paradigm shift in your perspective. So I want to show you something that I think is fascinating. If you take the word oneg, which is enjoyment, it actually has the same letters as the word nega, which is like an affliction, pain. And I put it down for you to show you. What's the difference between oneg and nega? It's really where you put the letter ayin. But you can take it on a deeper level. It's not only the letter ayin, it's ayin, and that's why I drew. That's about the extent of my artistic talents. I drew an eye because it's what we choose to focus on. There was a professor in a college class who told his class, his students, I'm giving you a test. I'm going to give you a paper, and I want you to write what you see on the paper. And this is what he drew. All the students wrote, they see a black dot on a white paper. They didn't write, I see a white paper with a black dot. Everyone focused on that black dot. It wasn't the oneg, it was the nega. And it's very interesting, my son Hananya pointed out to me that there's a halacha. It's really fascinating. We know that the Arba Minim represent us as people. There's a halacha that if an esrog has a black dot, the only time it's puzzle is if you hold it up and you still see, when you're looking at the whole esrog, not when it's down here and you're just looking at the black dot, but if you hold it up and you still see the dot, then it's puzzle. So basically, I think we can see that we have to focus on the positive so that our life is an oneg rather than seeing the nega. And the best antidote for depression is really to practice gratitude. There are actual scientific studies that prove and that show that the brain produces chemicals like dopamine and serotonin, which are neurotransmitters that are responsible for our emotions, and it makes us feel good. And I always wonder about the pasuk, mitzvah gedola liyos b'simcha tamid. What does it mean? So if I'm going through a hard time, I'm not b'simcha, definitely not tamid. What's simcha? So we, translate it as simcha is happiness. So if I'm not happy and I want to be happy, I might try maybe some retail therapy, like buying a dress or a bag I really don't need, maybe kukkish cake therapy, eating these, and it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. The dress, the happiness with the dress, afterwards you're like, why did I buy it? I really don't need it. Now it's going to be on my credit card bill. And the kukkish cake, yes, it was good only for a minute, and now it's a lifetime on my hips, and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't work. Why? Because when we're upset, what we're really doing is trying to satisfy it with things that are for our guf. And really, it's our neshama that we have to satisfy. And our neshama is only happy. And the true happiness is realizing that it's all coming from Hashem. And that's the only true happiness. Now, if you want to measure, we spoke about growth, and if you want to measure the growth in your emunah, take a stress test. What is a stress test? For those of you who've had it, and I'm talking about literally the stress test. You go to the doctor and they measure your blood pressure and your heart rate, and then they stress out your heart by asking you to go on a treadmill with at a speed and with elevation. And then they measure your heart rate and your blood pressure again. And what they're trying to see is how long does it take for your blood pressure to get back to normal after being stressed. If you are practicing your emunah all the time, then when you are stressed and you take the stress test, if you can implement all the things of saying, this is from Hashem, there is no plan B. I am where I need to be, or I can't control it. I can do my shtadlis, but it's all, the rest is out of my control. Then you can recalibrate and get back to normal quickly. And I'd like to conclude this talk with 2 points. Now, Rabbi Leaf came to the house. Those of you who know him from the Aguda or from Torah Anytime or from everywhere, he's pretty well known. He was at my house every day, but during the Shiva. And he knew that I was doing all the talking, so every day, at the end of the day before he left, he would say, Rebbitzin, you know, what were you mechadish today? And every day I would tell him, you know, the first day was like, I think we should print a book of what to say and what not to say during Shiva and all that. But then I took over and I was doing all the talking. So on the last day, I told him that all the years when I was in so much emotional pain, I always said that when Mashiach comes, I'm going to be first online to ask him all my questions. And then, after sitting Shiva, I had a major paradigm shift in my perspective. And I said, I understand now, and I think, that when Mashiach comes, I'm not getting online. Because I think we will all understand it, and I will understand it. And I was discussing with Hanania, you know, about my speech, and I told him I'm going to say this, and he gave me a beautiful insight on it. In Shachris, only on Shabbos, we say a lot of stuff, but in Tefillah L'Moshe, which is after Hodu, we say, Samchenu kimos inasenu shnos ra'inu ra. Make us happy like the days that were not good. And it's interesting that it says shnos ra'inu ra. It doesn't say the years that were bad. It says shnos ra'inu, that we saw as bad. Because there's no bad from Hashem. It's just things that we don't understand, we may think of as bad. So anyways, we say to Hashem, make us happy for the same amount of years that we were miserable, basically. So what would you expect the next pasuk to say? Give us bracha, give us many children, give us parnasa. But what's the next pasuk? Yira el avadecha palacha. What are we asking? Make us happy for all the years that we were miserable. What do we ask? We should understand your ways. It should be clear to us. And that's why it's a clear proof that when Mashiach comes, we will not have, the payback is going to be Mashiach, and we're going to understand everything clearly. And my final thought, and I think probably one of the most important thoughts, is that we, as the family, loved Yisrael unconditionally. Every parent wants to see nachas from their child, and unfortunately, he couldn't reciprocate. This was the purest form of love that a parent can have for a child, because there's no expectations to receive anything in return. And really, I'd like to emphasize is that this unconditional love is a love that we should really make an effort to show every single one of our children, that we are so lucky and privileged to have. To love a child unconditionally, and the children should know that we love them unconditionally. And I speak about this a lot in my parenting classes. But the child has to know, and the message we want to convey to our children is, I love you unconditionally, but it does not mean we agree with everything they do, and we're allowed to tell them what we don't think is okay. But nevertheless, they have to be secure in the knowledge that regardless, we love them unconditionally. And as Elul is approaching, this can be our tefillah to Hashem too. We say, Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu Vanenu. You are our Father. And that's what we ask of Hashem. You know, even if we don't deserve it, Ki ein banu masim, Chaneinu Vanenu. We ask Hashem, our Father, to love us unconditionally. And we ask Hashem to bring an end to all the pain and the suffering, and to bring Mashiach, when we're going to be reunited with our loved ones, and it's going to be a true Me'ein Olam Haba. Thank you very much for listening.